Hey everybody, welcome to the Song Revolution podcast, brought to you by Nashville Christian Songwriters. Nashville Christian Songwriters exists to empower Christian songwriters worldwide. I'm John Chisum, and this podcast exists to bring you valuable songwriting insights, inspiration, interviews, and just all around good fun with some of the greatest songwriters, producers, arrangers, artists, and creatives, and beyond. You can find out a whole lot more about us at NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com.
The sounds of Christmas, the ubiquitous Salvation Army Santa outside of Walmart and Best Buy, that annoying little bell clanging till you give him a buck just to make him stop. The bustle of shoppers and imaginary tinkling of silver bells, the very real laughter and shooshing of ice skaters in Rockefeller Center. The carols and classic songs and movies like It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, Holiday Inn, White Christmas, and all those movies we binge watch leading up to the big day to help us get in the Christmas spirit. It seems like Halloween is barely over before the malls and shopping centers and music on hold cranks up the endless loop of Winter Wonderland, I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, and Frosty the Snowman. And depending on your particular childhood memories of this holiday and how it played out in your house, this is either really awesome or a slow, merciless death akin to Chinese water torture that finally stops dripping on Christmas Day. But does the world really need another Christmas song? Aren't there enough already? Certainly no one needs another bad song about Christmas, but what if, just maybe, you wound up penning A Silent Night, or Oh Come All Ye Faithful, or Tender Tennessee Christmas that actually became part of the sacred canon of Christmas tunes? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. Why the world needs one more Christmas song, and why you need to write it today on the Song Revolution podcast. Well, hi everyone, John Chisum here, merry and bright, filled with lots of Christmas cheer and brimming with the spirit of old St. Nick, ready to tromp through miles of snow to share brightly wrapped bundles of baked goodies, bottles of cinnamon-laced eggnog, and warm my hands at the hearth as we sing all of our favorites by candlelight. Or not. Okay, full disclosure here. I tend to cringe when the Christmas season begins, dreading the endless stream of the same songs over and over and over. It wears me out to think about it. I know that there are probably equal numbers of people who both love and either just tolerate and maybe even hate listening to all this too. So I'm not alone in my slight dislike of the way our culture and the world have come to treat the season. I mean, this isn't the show to unpack all of that, but let's just say that I'm not a huge fan, but I certainly appreciate the truth of what we're singing about in many of the classic and new Christmas songs. I'm a Jesus follower, of course, and have been for 41 years, so I endorse the message and truth of the best Christmas songs and carols, of course. Hey, I'm as up for a sleigh ride and a stolen kiss under the mistletoe as the next guy, but I'm hungry for us Christian songwriters to take on the challenge of telling the greatest story ever told from some new angles and with fresh language that can penetrate the noise and help people connect with the real Jesus again. And that's why I wanted to do this show today, to say that despite the looping, constant cacophony of Christmas classics and carols, I believe there's always room for one more great Christmas song. I really do, and I think you should write it. So let's unpack that just a little and give you some tips and inspiration on how you could begin to go about it. Let's start with why the world needs one more great song about the birth of Jesus, and it's not really all that complicated. I didn't mention earlier, but Albert Finney, his version of Scrooge is my favorite movie, though the Muppets version is pretty good too. We all know the story going in. It's no surprise that Scrooge is a wounded soul and has come to worship money as his only comfort and form of salvation. Somewhere along the way, he becomes greedy and chooses money over Belle, the love of his life and the woman he should have married and had kids and grandkids with. He was, of course, feared and hated by the townspeople for the miserly old man he'd become. And it was only visits from 3 ghosts that turn his heart around overnight, a kind of resurrection and metaphor for being born again. In the end, that's the only story, right? I mean, if you ever take time to study how hit movies are made, the themes of resurrection occur over and over again because it's what we all long for. And life is full of death and resurrection over and over. And we just know this innately. It's the story of the original fall and the rescue that Jesus is for us, replayed in a million ways. And in this instance, the miserly old Scrooge finds a born-again experience with the foreshadowing of his wasted life and destructive end. It's not fun stuff, but I love it when Rizzo the Rat in the Muppets Christmas Carol ducks out for the final visitation from the quite scary ghost of Christmas yet to come. But if you've studied story and storytelling, it's pretty easy to recognize the standard resurrection plots in every great story, movie, and song. You may have read about Joseph Campbell's explanation of how great stories are written as the hero's journey, a narrative pattern that appears in drama, storytelling, myth, and religious ritual and psychological development. It describes the typical adventure of the archetype known as the hero, the person who goes out and achieves great deeds on behalf of the group, tribe, or civilization, or in the case of Scrooge and countless others, goes through a transformation while on some sort of journey. Well, let me describe the stages of this journey, but I want you to follow along each stage thinking about one of 2 movie characters that you're probably pretty familiar with, either Nemo, the little fish in the Disney movie Finding Nemo, or the character Neo, played by Keanu Reeves in The Matrix. I don't have time to unpack each character in each scene, but I bet you can follow roughly along if you'll pick one or the other that you know best and think about the progression of each movie. Or you could also apply it to Scrooge if you want. Well, here are the 12 stages of the hero's journey by American scholar Joseph Campbell. Number 1, it's the ordinary world. The hero, uneasy, uncomfortable, or unaware, is introduced sympathetically so the audience can identify with the situation or dilemma. The hero is shown against a background of environment, heredity, and personal history. Some kind of polarity in the hero's life is pulling in different directions and causing stress. And boy, that was just really heady, but all that really means is that he's in his typical setting. Okay, yeah, I'm reading that from something, but he's in his typical setting, right? And something happens that starts pulling him in a different direction. And that leads us to stage number 2, which is the call to adventure. It was for Nemo. I'm going to get in trouble here if I start trying to describe the scenes, but for Nemo, it was when he left the little safety that his dad always kept him in, and he wound up getting lost and going on this great adventure. Something shakes up the situation, either from external pressure or from something rising up from deep within. So the hero must face the beginnings of change. You can also, if you're a Star Wars fan, think about Luke Skywalker. And then that leads us to the 3rd phase, or refusal of the call. The hero feels the fear of the unknown and tries to turn away from the adventure, even if it's just for a moment. And, the other situation that can happen in this phase is that another character, another person, even in our own lives, can express the uncertainty and the danger ahead and cause us to have a momentary refusal to follow the adventure. And this leads us to number 4, some kind of meeting with a mentor. The hero comes across a seasoned traveler who gives him or her training, equipment, advice, or a special gift that will help on the journey. Or the hero reaches within to a source of courage and wisdom. And we can all imagine that in those different movies and how that went on, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and on and on. Number 5, crossing some kind of threshold. At the end of Act 1, the hero commits to leaving the ordinary world and enters a new region or condition, or something's happened that is completely unfamiliar, that challenges his values or rules or life as he knows it. Number 6, tests allies and enemies. The hero is tested and sorts out allegiances in this whole new realm, this strange new world that he or she finds him or herself in. I just suddenly started wanting to sing Ariel, a whole new world. I think that's it, right? Or you can think of Aladdin, them flying on the magic carpet, all those kinds of things. And then comes number 7, the approach. The hero and their newfound allies prepare for a major challenge in this whole new world. For Nemo, it was him and Dory trying to find what were they looking for? Sydney, right? So that was them prepping and beginning to go on this. And then number 8, the ordeal itself. Somewhere near the middle of the story, the hero enters a central space in the special world and confronts death or faces his or her greatest fear. But out of that moment of death comes a new life, which is phase number 9, or the reward. The hero takes possession of the treasure won by facing death. There may be a celebration, but there's also danger of losing the treasure again. And this is the part of the movies where suddenly it seems to be some brand new danger that you did not expect. The monster gets bigger, or there's a whole new monster or challenge that arises that threatens the life and the outcome for our hero. And then number 10, the road back. About 3/4 of the way through the story, the hero is driven to complete the adventure, leaving this special new world to be sure the treasure is brought home. Often a chase scene signals the urgency and danger of the mission. But then that leads us into number 11, phase 11, which is one we're familiar with, which is the resurrection. At the climax of the story, the hero is severely tested once more on the threshold of home. He or she is purified by some kind of sacrifice, another moment of death and rebirth, but on a higher and more complete level. By the hero's action, the polarities or the tensions that were in conflict at the beginning are finally resolved. And then number 12, a return with the magic elixir. The hero returns home or continues the journey bearing some element of the treasure that has the power to transform the world as the hero has been transformed. Now, you could probably follow along these stages with either Neo or Nemo, but it also follows the basic outline of our redemption story in Christ. And let's look at it from that angle. Number 1, the ordinary world for Jesus was his pre-incarnate state with the Father and with the Spirit. He was in eternal heaven, part of the Trinity, of course, and could have just stayed there, right? But number 2 is the call to adventure. And we all know John 3:16, that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So however that all happened in eternity, in the heart of God, the mind of the Trinity, Jesus was called to the adventure. He knew what was going to happen. He was, of course, omniscient, knew everything. So we can't even begin to explain that. But that's number 2, his call to adventure. And number 3, the refusal of the call. And for Jesus, this was the prayer on the Mount of Olives. If it's possible, Father, let this cup pass from me. That's pretty easy to see. Number 4, the meeting with the mentor or supernatural aid was when the angels came in the Garden of Gethsemane to attend to Jesus and give him strength. And then number 5, the crossing of a threshold. Jesus surrenders to the crowd by Judas' treacherous kiss. And then number 6, tests and allies and enemies. Jesus has already been betrayed by Judas, but is then betrayed by the very crowd that hailed him on the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, as well as by the Jewish leaders and those who gave him over to be crucified. His only allies, of course, the disciples, fled until the whole thing was over. Only his mother and a few onlookers hung around at the crucifixion. And then number 7, the approach. Jesus is beaten, mocked, scourged, and made to carry carry his own cross to Golgotha as he's approaching number 8, which is the ordeal. While Jesus' crucifixion was quite horrible physically, the real ordeal was a spiritual one as he became sin who knew no sin for us. The true ordeal for Jesus was happening on the inside. All the while, he could have called 10,000 angels, as the old song goes. He didn't have to stay on the cross, right? Even after he got there, he could have called the whole thing off, but because of his love for us, he didn't. And then number 9, the reward. Ephesians says that Jesus led captivity captive. That's kind of an old-timey phrase, but what it means is that he triumphed over his enemies, which was death, hell, and the grave, and even Satan himself. Then number 10, the road back. We're not sure why he had to stay down in the grave for a couple of days, but this was obviously required and part of his road back, waiting on the power of God to be released, which is phase number 11, the resurrection, the actual moment that life re-entered Jesus and he was raised from death, and all of the mystery and the power that is indicated with that, even that word resurrection. And then number 12, the return with the magic elixir. In our case, of course, it's the elixir of eternal life that Jesus comes back with, that same life that he's now given to us as we exercise faith in his finished work. So the 2,000-year-old story of Jesus is actually the culmination of every pre-Advent story. People have been telling a resurrection story for thousands of years before Christ that pointed to his coming in every culture and tongue, whether they, continued on to acknowledge him or not. There are stories that existed for thousands of years. And now that we're on the flip side of it, every story that we tell points back to this resurrection story. And that's why it's vital that we keep telling it in songs and even more Christmas songs. His story is our story. I think often of the 19th century poet's words of Gerard Manley Hopkins, who wrote of Christ in 10,000 places. And that's what happens over and over as his resurrection story is echoed in ours, and ours pre-shadowed in his. And that's why we keep singing about it, writing about it, telling it over and over again. Christmas songs center on his advent, his coming, his birth, which is only the beginning phase or that call to adventure for Jesus. But now we've been called to adventure too, to step out of the comfortable places and start our great adventure to total resurrection life by faith in his completed work. Every person who hears your Christmas songs has the potential to respond to this call to adventure too. And that's why you must write. If you feel called to write for God, this is what you're called to write. You're calling others out into the wild adventure of following him, just as you have. If they follow that call through your song, they join the story of Jesus, and he faithfully leads them along as he does you and me. So that's the why. And here's the how. I don't believe that most, if any of the writers, the most loved and even the most despised songs of Christmas probably had any clue that their creations would blanket the globe as they have, yet we wouldn't recognize our lives or this season without them. I believe they were just doing what they could in the moment. Father Joseph Moore, for instance, had written a poem in 1816 called Stille Nacht, or as we know it, Silent Night. But it wasn't until 2 years later that he needed a song for Christmas Eve services in his tiny parish where the organ was in disrepair. Some say rust, some say mice, but either way, he gave the poem to organist Franz Gruber to compose a melody to it accompanied on guitar only on Christmas Eve, and the two of them debuted the song that night in 1818. Silent Night is now sung in over 300 languages worldwide, but Moore and Gruber were only concerned with writing for their small parish that Christmas Eve so long ago. Sometimes I wonder if we've forgotten that God's given us our gifts for the people around us first, and the rest of the world secondly, if at all. In a techno age where we can compose a song in about 10 minutes and have it up on YouTube in about 30 minutes, I wonder if we've wandered away from the idea of serving those closest to us and seeking to bless them first, then see where it goes as we trust God. Now, don't get me wrong, I've helped take thousands of songs to the world through some amazing recordings and products. And I believe in publishing as a business. Obviously, that's what I do. In the Nashville Christian Songwriters Boot Camp that we call Mastering the Art and Craft of Christian Songwriting, I teach the very principles and coach aspiring songwriters to write with the end user in mind and to really try to reach the world with their songs. And the word commercial only means reaching the largest number of people. But, that doesn't preclude the people closest to us. In fact, I believe it starts there. I love all of our podcasts, but one that stands out to me that you should go back and listen to is Mike Harland. He was on the show a few months back, and Mike is the director of Lifeway Worship. And in that show, he talked about the fact that you just can't keep a great song hidden. It's one of my favorite podcasts, really. The guy's brilliant, and that's why he is where he is. But he dropped some content on that podcast that is just gold. And if you haven't heard that one, so many great ones, but go back and check out Mike Harland. He made a really, really great case that a great song can't be held back from the world, and I believe that's true. I believe that you're already in front of the right people. I mean, writers tend to have the belief that getting in front of the right people is the key to their immediate success, but I think that's a myth. Because faithfulness to God's call on your life is the key to success, whatever that winds up meaning for you. And if you need to be in front of certain people, God will take you there, just like he did for Joseph, even though his brothers threw him in a pit, and Queen Esther when Mordecai and all the Hebrews would have been killed in the Old Testament, and Paul and Silas released from prison while singing at midnight in the book of Acts, and all the miraculous angelic connections in the New Testament, miraculous things that you can't even explain. I mean, if God has truly given you a song that he intends for the world, just, my friends, sing it where you are and leave the rest to him. But, and this is a big but, your first step may be to learn how to write great songs in the first place. Just because you put some words to music and call it a song doesn't mean anyone's going to care about it. Thinking that you know everything there is to know about songwriting without having any real knowledge of it is nothing but arrogance and pride. And blaming God for bad songs is a sin. Blaming everyone else for not recognizing your immense talent is denial. There's just a very real process involved in writing songs that can reach the largest number of people, and assuming you're already doing it is the first thing that keeps your songs from being the kind that can zoom out to the whole world. I mean, technology is a blessing and a curse in this way. I mean, you actually already have everything you need to be heard. Now you need something worth hearing. And it starts with a great idea. You want to write about the birth of Jesus, but everything's been said about it, right? Wrong. Somewhere deep inside you is the germ of an idea, a new angle, a fresh perspective, a key insight that might exist somewhere else in poetry or literature or some other form that has just never surfaced in a song before that you could discover. That great idea is then developed into a great hook that encapsulates the great idea in a phrase and title that is immediately recognizable, singable, emotional, and memorable. Think Chris Tomlin and his co-writers here. Chris uses pretty much the same powerful formula in every song he writes, and that's why he breaks out time and time again. He gets it. He's not just writing from his heart or writing his feelings. He knows what he's doing, and he and his team hit it over and over, and I want him on the show someday. They understand the hero's journey, and they take us through it every time. There's an actual mini hero's journey in every successful song, even if 10 of the steps are covered in one line in a verse. Songs that succeed take us through an emotional and spiritual progression. And that's why so many first verses have the words brokenness and wounded and hurting in them, because writers feel that intuitively, so they're trying to work with that. But I'm getting tired of those words. I don't know about you. I just think we've got to think higher thoughts than this and find fresh ways to deliver the goods. I mean, you're failing because you're not thinking. You know you're making progress when your head hurts. You got to think about this stuff night and day and work this process. When you can take a great idea and learn to develop it into a dozen different hooks, then you're really on track. You are really on track and you're beginning to know what you're doing. You know, most writers sit down with an empty head and try to come up with something out of nothing instead of spending time on their ideas first, then developing multiple hooks from that idea. And that's when the research begins to support the one big idea with great lyrics and sections that all point to the payoff of your stunning idea that is now a stunning hook. And from there, you create work tapes and demos, and you begin to represent the flavor of the song in a recording, and you sing it everywhere you can and play it for whoever will listen. But believe me, most people haven't taken enough time in the idea phase to warrant the rest of the process, and then they wonder why people smile politely and then change the subject. I mean, writers, you must listen to me if you truly feel called. Read, 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 read. Get filled up with great words if you want to write great songs. Get filled up with great concepts and phrases and language that inspires if you wish to inspire people. Pick up a hymnal, for goodness sake, or a book of common prayer or sermons from some of the greatest preachers throughout history and start gathering words that you can use in your songs. Stop writing from your feelings only and writing out of intuition only, just what you think songwriting is about, and begin to get some real skills to make your songs worth being heard. You have to build value in your songs. You're the one who has to begin to build that platform under what you're doing. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. You have got to do this homework. I can't emphasize that enough. Read, 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 and then read some more. That's the only way that you're going to be filled with the kind of words that you want to be filled with to communicate your stories, whether it's about Jesus in the manger or your own stories. You've got to read and read and read. Can I get a little amen? Yes, I think I'm getting an amen here in the house. All right, so stop. Do yourself a favor. If you truly feel passionate, get some help. You have to build value in your songs and stop blindly expecting people to like your songs just because you feel passionately about songwriting. If you truly feel passionate, then get some help. Do yourself and all of us a favor and invest in your calling if you truly believe in it. It's no one else's fault that you're not a successful songwriter. Taking ownership of your calling to write is the single most important thing you can do right now to ultimately fulfill it. I'm going to say that again. Taking ownership of your calling to write is the single most important thing you can do right now to ultimately fulfill it. Hoping for it is useless. Praying for it without action is useless. Refusing to take your head out of the sand about how it all really happens is useless. And the world is impoverished for your lack of belief in God and yourself, that He will lead you and provide what you need to know and learn and invest to become the writer that you say you want to be. Do your homework. Go to conferences. Look at what we offer for free and as paid resources at NCS, and soak it all in to take the steps that you've got to take. No one's going to show up and do it for you. They're just not going to do that. The day of being discovered by a record company or publisher are over. You must build value into your songs and your platform and your fan base and social media and your ministry. But it all begins with writing with a purpose other than to be published and have everyone admire your talents. Your talents aren't for you anyway, but for the benefit of others. You're required by God to develop them to the best of your ability as a faithful steward, and I'm giving you a lot of keys today to success on this show. Do we need one more Christmas song? Absolutely. We need 1 million more Christmas songs because the Christmas story is the greatest story that we'll be gathering around for eternity. Its essence will never grow old because it's the story of resurrection, the only real story worth telling. And there are people waiting to be reached by your Christmas song, whether it ever gets played on a single radio station or not. In fact, you need to hear the song and believe God to resurrect some parts of your own heart, right? Write and sing this story over and over, right where you are, and leave the results up to God as you trust Him for the next step and the next and the next. He's got this. If He wants you before kings in the music industry, those doors will open in His time and in His way. Just be ready for it. Learn what you need to learn to write at your best and stop settling for less. And armed with this attitude, maybe you can walk through the mall and start humming along with the songs again, actually enjoying yet another version of Winter Wonderland. I'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show today. I'm blown away with the encouragement and inspiration that every guest brings, and today was certainly no different. If you want even more encouragement and inspiration to take your songwriting to the next level, be sure to check out NCS membership over on our site at NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com. We're all about empowering you to become the best Christian songwriter that you can be, and NCS membership is simply the fastest and easiest way to get there. Become the songwriter that you were born to be by joining NCS membership today. I'll see you next time on the Song Revolution Podcast.